Welcome to this class on congressional committees. If you recall, in one of the classes in this series on the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, I made a brief mention of congressional committees in context of the members of Congress relegating some of their responsibilities to the bureaucracy. There are different departments and agencies doing the role of Congress. If you recall, some of these departments and agencies take on the role of not only Congress, but the role of the other branches as well. Some departments and agencies act as the legislature, the judiciary, and the executive branch. This is clearly unconstitutional. It is the same as when Congress allows the Supreme Court and other courts to legislate from the bench. Congress has control over the lower courts, but acts as if the lower courts have control over them sometimes. Again, this is clearly unconstitutional. And it is unconstitutional, again, for the bureaucracy to take on the role of the Congress, the executive branch, or the judiciary. It may be one of these branches the bureaucracy acts as, or all three. Some departments and agencies come up with rules and regulations that carry the force of law. And some of these bureaucracies have their own policing departments. They legislate, determine those who break their rules, and execute judgment on them, complete with arrest and other such policing powers. Definitely, this is outside of the Constitution, and no republic can withstand such a monstrous beast as this. Think about it. We have unelected people in these departments and agencies who have control over our lives. To top it off, people have their own political bias as well that plays into their role as a bureaucrat. In the end, our elected officials do little to represent us, but it is people whose names we will never know from these bloated bureaucracies who always have a job and good pensions that we, the taxpayers, pay for. It is in the Congress where these activities should take place. Congress has lazily turned over some of their responsibilities to these unelected and, might I say, unaccountable bureaucrats. It was several months ago where the Secretary of the Department of Education said they came up with a rule or regulation about sexual harassment or sexual assault on college campuses that carries the force of law. Those were her exact words, carries the force of law. It was an unconstitutional move. The constitutionality of that entire department is in question anyway. Congress should not let these matters slide by, but they seem content to allow these unelected people to do some of their job for them. What happens is there are many committees in both the House and the Senate. This is where the action takes place, is supposed to take place, and where oversight over the department and agencies commence. This is where legislation is formed and voted on. This is where the work of the people gets done. Usually, members of Congress with seniority are appointed as the committee chair for the majority party, or the ranking member for the minority party in the House, or the chair in the Senate and the co-chair. People are usually appointed to these committees depending on their particular expertise. So the knowledgeable ones in Congress serve on the different committees to act on behalf of the people who voted for them. They are elected and accountable to the people, unlike the bureaucrats who often do the job of Congress. We, the people, have a job before us, and that is to hold our congressmen's feet to the fire, to hold them accountable for passing on their duties to an unnamed, unelected person, or even when they pass it on to the judicial branch or the executive. The committees in Congress serve as they serve an important purpose, and we, the people, need to make sure that they carry that purpose out. We need to make our voice known to our elected officials to do the right thing. Take back their power from the monstrous beasts of the bureaucracy and do the will of the people. Or, well, they'll just be replaced at the next election. Our pressure can have an effect. Our votes speak. Our money speaks. For a long time now, many of us have been praying that God would expose corruption in the halls of Congress and in our government in general. And that has been happening. Some bureaucrats do not even cooperate with congressional oversight committees, and they refuse to release key documents that Congress requests and that they have a right to request. Stall and delay tactics are used as some of these people choose to protect their agency rather than bring full disclosure to light. And where it will not betray means and methods and people, the public also has a right to know. The bureaucracy can be fraught with corruption. This is not to denigrate the good government workers who do their job with honesty and to the best of their ability. Some of them are absolutely necessary for government to function, as long as they do not take on the duties of any of the three branches of government, and especially without intense oversight. This is especially true when you go through all those entities that are clearly outside of the Constitution and should be disbanded with power back to the Congress and to the local level. That is something we addressed in an earlier class in this series, so I'm not going to go back into that any further. I just thought it was important to provide this backdrop so we have a better understanding of the whole process and how things can go wrong and where committees fit in. It is important to understand this so we know how it is supposed to be. Later on, I will demonstrate how a bill properly goes through the process and how it should not, using actual examples. But for now, let's get back to committees and their purpose and how it all works. One of the jobs of committees is to bring legislation from the inception to a final vote. Not all bill proposals make it through the process. There is a process for how a piece of legislation makes its way through to a floor vote. The following information is from numerous sources, including the government, private entities, and general public information. So now we want to look at how a bill is passed. It begins with a bill introduced to either the Senate or the House or both. Anyone can write a bill. You can write a bill. I can write a bill. We just need to present it to a member of Congress who can sponsor the bill. And even the president has to go through a process when he has a bill he wants to see brought before the Congress. Now, we can bring our ideas to Congress or whoever has the idea for a bill, but the text of the bill is drafted by congressional aides or staff. Once this step is completed, the bill is introduced by a representative in the House or a senator in the Senate. Each of them would be the sponsor of the bill. The bill can be introduced any time when Congress is in session. It is placed on record as having been introduced and is signed a number by a bill clerk. At this point, congressional leaders determine the course of action for the bill. There are three actions the Congress can make. They can send it to committee, they can put it on a calendar, or they can hold it. Once the committee or committees have a bill, the next step is to determine what its chances are of passing with a full House or full Senate vote. The committee may decide to hold hearings to better understand the implications of the bill. Hearings allow for people outside of Congress to let their voices be heard on it, such as experts in related fields, those whose lives would be affected by the bill, or agency heads who would be involved with the bill in some process, and so forth. The committee may decide to send the bill to a subcommittee. If the committee decides to keep the bill at the full committee level, it means either the bill isn't going to go anywhere or that it will be acted on quickly. The success of a bill depends on the majority party's agenda. A bill can die at this stage. This is why it is very important to vote the right way for your elected officials. What happens if a bill goes to a subcommittee? The subcommittee is composed of legislators with specific skills and expertise. The subcommittee can change the bill and vote to send it back to the full committee. Either a full committee or a subcommittee can hold the hearings. If neither decides to hold hearings, that is usually the death knell of the bill. At this stage, if a bill is decided on to go forward, the bill goes to markup. This is where changes are made before the bill goes to the floor for all the senators or all the House members to vote on. Instead of outright changes, there might be amendments made. If the changes to the bill are substantial, it is called a clean bill, and it might even be given a new name. Understanding this helps with tracking the bill that we have our eyes on, so we can keep on top of all of these changes. The bill can be killed at this point as well if the committee determines to not send the bill to the floor for a vote. If they decide to send it to the floor, it is called ordering a bill reported. If a committee approves of a bill, it can be sent to the floor for the entire Senate or House to vote on, depending on which chamber it originated in. There is more debate before the bill is voted on. If the bill is passed, it is then sent to the other chamber with the same process followed, where the committees do their part and it eventually reaches the floor. For instance, if the House wants to make changes to a Senate bill that was sent over, or vice versa, then a conference committee composed of members of both committees meet to hammer out the differences between the two versions, between the House version and the Senate version. If a compromise cannot be reached at this point, the bill is dead. If they are able to reconcile, then the conference committee issues a report with their recommendations for the final bill. The bill finally is sent to the president for his signature. After he signs the bill, it becomes law. The president can also veto the bill by not signing it. Can Congress do anything once the president vetoes a bill? Yes, they can. They can override the veto by passing it by a 2/3 majority. It then becomes law. Do you see there are steps along the way where a bill can be killed? It has to go through this process, and a lot can go right or wrong. That is why it is recommended that anyone interested in a particular piece of legislation to be passed to get involved in the process as early as possible. As citizens, we need to keep pressure on Congress and particular committees and subcommittee members so they see the passion, the interest, and so we can hold their feet to the fire. Congress.gov and other bill tracking sites are available to follow a bill from introduction and to keep track of it every step along the way. Sponsor and co-sponsor names are available, as well as committee members, so you can contact them. Sometimes our own senators or representatives, even if they're not on the committee that is responsible for the bill, can have an impact on the committee depending on their relationship with one or more members of that same committee. And don't think you're a bother when you contact the committees with impending legislation. Any interested citizen is welcome to participate with their thoughts, their ideas. They actually want to hear from us. That is why it is important to get involved early in the process where the legislation is being formulated. I look back at a number of years at some bills, and there are ones that were introduced to the Senate, for instance, over a decade ago that never made it past the introduction stage. There are some, of course, that make it through quite quickly through the whole process. Usually these are currently pertinent and necessary and popular with the people, and they're important enough to require immediate action. But first, we want to learn a little more about committees before proceeding. There are more committees in the House than in the Senate, but both chambers of Congress share a number of committees that have the same function. And just to name a few out of more than a dozen: Agriculture, Armed Services, Education and Labor, Foreign Affairs, Homeland Security, Judiciary, Veterans Affairs. In addition to the main committees, or standing committees as they are called, which designates their permanence, they also created subcommittees. This is where the real work takes place, where the details are ironed out before the legislation is given back to the full committee. In addition to the full committee, in subcommittees, there are select committees. These serve a special function that the standing committees cannot handle. The select committees are generally not standing or permanent. Congress is made up of standing committees and select committees. Standing committees are the ones involved in the nuts and bolts of legislation, whereas select committees usually have an advisory role for the full or for the subcommittees. Members of the Senate are limited in the number of committees they can serve on, and the committees can hire their own staff and resources depending on if the majority party approves. Again, that's why our votes are very important, so we have the majority party. Conference committees, as I already mentioned, come into play as legislation between the two chambers is ironed out. They are composed of members of the House and the Senate who were first involved in introducing the legislation. They come together to reconcile one House version with the Senate version, or vice versa. That way they come up with a cohesive bill that is favorable to most in order to pass with a full floor vote. Now, let's examine how the committee and subcommittee process works. After an election, the Senate, for instance, decides on committee members. There will be more members of the majority party in each committee. The selection of committee members is determined by the ratio of majority to minority in the Senate. So, if the majority is Republican, the majority of members on a committee will be Republican and vice versa. For instance, at this time in the Judiciary Committee, there are 22 members. Republicans are the majority party in the Senate, so there are 12 Republican members and 10 from the Democrat Party. In the House Committee on Education and Labor, the makeup is 28 Democrats and 20 Republicans, reflecting the Democrat majority in the House. Members of the committee are decided on by the parties. It takes 2/3 of the Senate to approve of the members of both the committees and subcommittees. Committees determine the rules that govern their committees. Those rules can be changed at the beginning of each new Congress, where this is all taken up. Committees consider legislation as it is referred to them, and after consideration, it is brought before the full Senate for their consideration, where it is debated and voted on. Now, let's discuss several of these committees, perhaps several of the most familiar ones, to show how they work. Also, remember the process for a bill making its way through the process. I'm also going to show through different bills how it worked for each one. This will demonstrate how the process is supposed to work. I will also present a bill that took a nefarious route. It demonstrates how a bill that passed is not supposed to go through the process. Let's examine several committees now. Some of these committees show up later on when we look at several bills that have made their way through Congress. First, we will begin with the Senate Judiciary Committee. This is important because we just went through hearings for a Supreme Court nominee. The Senate Judiciary Committee is involved in a number of duties such as legislative proposals, as are other committees. Oversight is an important aspect of committees, and the Judiciary Committee is no exception. It conducts oversight of the Department of Justice, the FBI, Homeland Security, and a number of other agencies. There are subcommittees in the Judiciary Committee that are involved in intellectual property, oversight agency action, the Constitution, crime and terrorism, border security and immigration, antitrust, competition policy and consumer rights, and federal rights and federal courts. The Judiciary Committee also is involved in the nomination process of both judicial and executive nominations. The Senate, under Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution, has the sole power to advise and consent regarding the President's nominees. Nominations made by the President to the Department of Justice and other departments and agencies are part of that. One of the jobs of the Senate Judiciary Committee are federal judicial nominations. These would be the Supreme Court level as well as district and appellate courts. Although the Senate Judiciary Committee holds hearings for the Supreme Court and other federal level court appointments, it is not in the Constitution specifically for hearings to take place. It is a rule of the Senate, and so it would not be unconstitutional to skip the hearings and go to the floor for debate and vote. Hearings are a matter of preference. As I mentioned, the Senate Judiciary Committee is involved in both executive and judicial nominations. Executive nominations involve executive positions at all executive agencies, such as the Department of Justice and all its agencies. This includes the FBI and so forth. All federal judgeship nominees are considered by the committee as well. How this works is the President's nominations are sent to the Senate, where they are referred to the appropriate committee. The committee will have a hearing where committee members make opening statements, listen to the nominee's opening statement, and then ask the nominee questions. They can carry on over days at times. Too often, these hearings lately have become contentious rather than considerately and factually analyzing the nominee, and with judicial nominees, their judicial philosophy and opinions. There are a number of examples in the past for the Democrats, and I do not mean to pick on one side here, but this factually is the case. They choose to conduct a character assassination of the judicial nominee with stories made up and even reportedly false witnesses. The attacks can be relentless. One only needs to go back recently to the Judge Kavanaugh hearings and what a spectacle that was, with incredible charges made but not proven. Actually, the opposite of those charges was proven to be fact. So without evidence, a man's character is assassinated with his children and wife present in the Senate hearing chambers and millions of Americans watching and people in other countries watching as well. Going back further, there was the Justice Clarence Thomas hearings in 1991 with a character assassination, and Judge Robert Bork as well in 1987. Kavanaugh and Thomas went on to be appointed to the Supreme Court. Bork did not make it that far. The character assassination of him and misrepresentation of him proved to be too brutal. Bork, who has since passed away, was considered to be one of the most brilliant constitutional minds of our times. Now, unfortunately, his name has become associated with a nominee being mistreated and attacked as being borked. The late Justice Antonin Scalia, a Republican nominee, in 1986 passed the floor vote with bipartisan support. My, how times have changed. You see, the senators are considered to be the statesmen. The House members are supposed to be the scrappy ones, and the Senate, the statesmen. Sadly, too many in the Senate lately have become some of the ones without decorum, maturity, and decency that they are supposed to have, and some of that is displayed in the nomination process hearings. When they can't attack one's character, they will attack their Christianity or, in some cases, the president's policies, and so forth. We expect decorum from all of our congressmen. Now back to the process. If the committee votes to send the nomination to the full Senate, debate on the floor proceeds by all members of the Senate. The debate is supposed to involve the nominee's approach to the Constitution regarding certain issues and topics. Some, however, may use the debate to attack the president or other aspects not pertinent to the process at hand. After the debate is finished, a vote is taken whether to confirm the nominee. If the nominee is confirmed, the president is notified and the nominee is sworn in. There are 2 oaths of office required for the new justice. One is a judicial oath under the Judicial Act of 1789, and the other is a constitutional oath, which is required in our Constitution under Article 4. You will notice the swearing in of the new justice is conducted by a member of the Supreme Court. Usually it is the Chief Justice, but it could also be the next highest ranking member. These 2 oaths are why you see 2 ceremonies when a new justice is confirmed. The constitutional oath is the official swearing in. I hope this gives you a quick summary of what happens in the judiciary. Now let's move on to the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. Here we have a select committee. As you recall, the Select Committee is one that takes on responsibilities that the Standing or Main Committee cannot. You might have heard of this committee a lot in recent months and years due to investigations into various government spy operations into the current president and his administration. This committee was created in 1976 to oversee the intelligence agencies of the U.S. government with the goal of making certain those activities are lawful and in line with the U.S. Constitution. This committee is composed of 19 senators, 10 majority party and 9 minority party. This is not a proportional ratio set up as in the other committees, you'll notice. The rules for this committee are that the majority has 1 extra person on the committee. This committee's rules require that the committee members are also members of other committees such as Armed Forces, Foreign Relations, the Judiciary Committee, and Appropriations. This has to do with being able to coordinate with those committees. The committee staff takes care of reports, budgets, and they do investigations for the committee. They also prepare legislation. The committee has access to more sensitive intelligence information than the full Senate does. This committee receives updated intelligence activities by the president through the specific intelligence agencies. This way, the committee is apprised of all intelligence failures or covert actions. There are situations where only the chairman and vice chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee and the chairman and ranking member of the House Committee, as well as the House and Senate leadership, are briefed. Even so, a less complete briefing is supplied to the full committee. Most hearings of the committee are in private or closed session due to the sensitive nature of the hearings. Requests for funding levels and range of activities of the agencies, such as the kind of intelligence conducted that would be allowed, comes before the committee, like legislation that involves surveillance of U.S. citizens. Recommendations are then made to the Senate. They also help with presidential choices to lead the intelligence agencies. Committee members analyze the many subject areas in order to inform policy decisions. Of course, oversight is one of the functions as well. With oversight, the committee members are able to interact with members of the intelligence community, enabling them to address problems as they come up and even prevent some problems from arising in the first place. Now, let's just take a brief look at the House Ways and Means Committee. I want to quickly mention this one because it is considered to be the most powerful committee in the House and one that is a desirable appointment for many representatives. The House holds the purse strings of the government, and that could be a reason why it is so powerful. Since all our taxes come from the House of Representatives, this committee is the one who writes those laws. They also are involved with Social Security, Medicare, and several benevolent programs of assistance. An interesting note regarding this committee is that if a representative is a member of this committee, they cannot ordinarily serve on other committees. Several of the subcommittees for the full committee are health, assisting the full committee in its oversight duties, Social Security, trade, and customs. And even briefer mention, perhaps many of you have heard of the House Appropriations Committee. This committee is basically responsible for funding the government. It has 12 subcommittees. Now let's take a look at some bills to further demonstrate how the committee process works. I want to compare and contrast several bills, two which went through the process the right way, of which one has passed and the other has been sitting in committee, and a third bill that did not go about passing in the right way, and then a brief mention of several other bills and their status. At Congress.gov, which I mentioned earlier, is a bill tracker. It is a concise website that follows the bills through the entire process. You can check it out and find a specific bill or browse the bills. There are a number of filters you can choose to limit your results. The bills go through 6 steps according to this tracker. You can check for bills that have made it to any one of those stages through the filter area. The sponsors, co-sponsors, committee members, text of the bill, details of each action taken, and more is found on the tracker site. The first step they give is introduced. Number 2 is passed Senate. Number 3, passed House. Number 4, resolving differences. Number 5, to President. And number 6, became law. Let's examine a bill that went through the process as it is supposed to. It's HR, that's House Resolution 724, Public Law 116-72, Preventing Animal Cruelty and Torture. This bill was introduced to the House Judiciary and Senate Judiciary Committees on January 23, 2019. The sponsor was Representative Theodore Deutsch of Florida. It became law on November 25, 2019. The bill deals with the prevention of animal crushing, and in addition to the bill was criminality of the distribution of videos depicting the same behavior and the intentionality of engaging in animal crushing. The legislation spells out the legal penalties for such a crime. Exceptions are if it's done for scientific research, if it's unintentional, if it's in self-defense, or if it's in the process of euthanizing the animal. The bill was introduced in the House on January 23, 2019, where it passed on October of that same year. The Senate Judiciary Committee, by unanimous consent, sent the bill to the full Senate on November 5, 2019. On the 18th of November, the bill was presented to the President, which he signed on the 25th. On that day, it became law. So here we have a bill that was agreed upon unanimously by both chambers of Congress. Now, in contrast of a bill where unanimous consent has not been found and is still waiting for further action, we have the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act, the Senate Bill 3275. It was introduced in the House on January 3, 2017, and passed the House in October 3, 2017. Republicans held the majority in the House at that time. The final vote was 237 yeas, 189 nays. It was sent to the Senate, who referred it to the Senate Judiciary Committee on October 4, 2017, and that is where the last action was taken. It came up again, introduced by its sponsor, Senator Lindsey Graham, on February 11, 2020. The latest action on that bill occurred on February 25, 2020. The Government Bill Activity Site says, and I'm reading this, cloture on the motion to proceed to the measure not involved in the Senate by yea-nay vote, 53 to 44. Cloture means, quote, a method of closing a debate and causing an immediate vote to be taken on the question, unquote. And another description, the closing or limitation of debate in a legislative body, especially by calling for a vote. So this bill was taken up a second time by Senator Lindsey Graham in the Senate. And it sits there. So on February 25, 2020, just as this was being taken up, there was an article written by Alexandria DeSanctis in the National Review. I want to read bits of what she wrote because she just stated it so well. Quote, last November, President Donald Trump signed the Preventing Animal Cruelty and Torture Act, criminalizing some acts of animal abuse. The Senate had passed the legislation unanimously. This week, the Senate will consider a bill to criminalize the act of killing an unborn human being after 20 weeks gestation, the point at which scientific evidence suggests fetuses can feel pain. But the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act will not pass, and it didn't. Because too many politicians are committed to the notion that the unborn have no rights if they are deemed unwanted. The point is not, of course, that animal cruelty is acceptable or should be legal, though it is debatable whether it is a matter in which the federal government may intervene. But we must ask ourselves, what kind of society produces citizens and lawmakers alike who see the evil in crushing animals, but who cannot agree that it should be illegal to crush a tiny human being? I want to repeat that line she wrote. What kind of society produces citizens and lawmakers alike who see the evil in crushing animals, but who cannot agree that it should be illegal to crush a tiny human being? The last time the Senate considered the pain-capable bill, and I'm still reading from her writing, in January 2018, the legislation already had passed the Republican-held House by a wide margin. It failed in the Senate after 44 Democrats, along with abortion supporters Susan Collins, Republican Maine, and Lisa Murkowski, Republican Alaska, opposed it, unquote. I will add that 2 Democrat senators voted with Republicans, Bob Casey of Pennsylvania and Joe Manchin of West Virginia. This is a bill that the majority of Americans are for. And I continue to read from this article. Janine Mancini, president of March for Life, harshly criticized the Democrats for blocking the bill, along with the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, which also failed to meet the 60-vote threshold this week. It is deeply disappointing that some elected officials in the Senate have promised to block even legislation that mandates medical care for children who survive an abortion. Are these patients or are they medical waste? To some, the answer hinges entirely on whether they are wanted by their mothers. A majority of Americans support pain-capable abortion bans, not because science has irrefutably proven that every fetus feels the same level of pain, but because it should not require definitive scientific proof, an ever-evolving standard. To decline to inflict death by dismemberment on human beings based on arbitrary assessments of their value, unquote. Think about that, those important statements. Now, here are a couple bills that made it through the process quickly without a problem. On July 2, 2020, Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina introduced Senate Bill 4209, Protecting Nonprofits from Catastrophic Cash Flow Strain Act of 2020. It became law on August 3, 2020. You can see how a bill deemed of immediate necessity by both parties can make its way to become law very quickly. And Senate Bill 1838, the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act of 2019, introduced by Senator Marco Rubio on June 13, 2019, to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. It became law on November 27, 2019. It was introduced in the Senate, passed, sent to the House, where it passed, was presented to the President on November 21, 2019, and signed by the President November 27, 2019. Those were brief mentions of bills that went through the process the way they should. Now for the one that didn't. I think you might know which one that is. Why, it's Obamacare, of course, or the ACA Affordable Care Act. I will call it Obamacare. There were twists and turns and dirty tricks to get this bill passed and signed by the president, who was Barack Obama at the time. Let's take a look at the process with this one. You will see how unforeseen events can derail a bill or help it along, depending on which side you're on, and how the process can get tricky, literally. This is where a bill illegalities were committed. This is a bill where illegalities were committed along the path to confirmation. I'm not going to get into many of the details just because there's so much and it can get hard to follow. But just remember, members of Congress were supposed to enjoy the same health care as the rest of America under Obamacare. Well, Obama and the Democrats found a way around it, which is reportedly illegal. Congress got to keep their health care through a backhanded way. There are other twists and turns I'm just not going to cover, and all the shenanigans. It would just be a lot. But to present basically what happened, so I'll just cover some of them. Obama's brainchild, Obamacare, or H.R. 3962, was introduced to the House of Representatives in July 2009. I'm going to briefly read the main points of the Obamacare timeline as documented by numerous sources. See if you can follow. On August 25, 2009, Senator Ted Kennedy died, ending the Democrats' majority in the Senate. Recall, you need 60 votes in the Senate to pass a bill. In September of 2009, a Democrat is appointed as interim senator from Massachusetts to replace Kennedy. This gave the Democrats their 60th vote back. In the meantime, in the House, a floor vote was taken for Obamacare on November 7, 2009. The result was 219 yeas and 215 nays, so it passed by a narrow margin. 39 Democrats voted with the Republicans, and 1 Republican voted with the Democrats. In January of 2010, the Senate had a new member, Scott Brown, Republican from Massachusetts. And in a special election, he replaced the interim senator filling in for the departed Kennedy. So this took away the Democrats' 60th vote. Again, Brown was against Obamacare. What were the Democrats to do now without their 60th vote? Pull some tricks, of course. The bill had passed in the House by a narrow margin of only a few votes, but the Senate needed to pass their bill too. What the Democrats did resulted in much consternation with Republicans. To provide further insight on the matter, one author writes, if you recall, Nancy Pelosi's Democratic majority in the House of Representatives was unable to pass their version of a health care law. Because all revenue bills have to originate in the House, the Senate found a bill that met those qualifications, H.R. 3590, a military housing bill. They essentially stripped the bill of its original language and turned it into the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, PPACA, aka Obamacare. Unquote. Democrats used budget reconciliation to get the job done. Now I'm reading from this author again. So Senate Leader Harry Reid cut a deal with Pelosi. The House would pass the Senate bill without any changes if the Senate agreed to pass a separate bill by the House that made changes to the Senate version of Obamacare. This second bill was called the Reconciliation Act of 2010. So the House passed PPACA, the Senate bill, as well as their Reconciliation Act. At this point, PPACA was ready for the president to sign, but the Senate still needed to pass the Reconciliation Act from the House. Remember that the Senate only had 59 votes to pass the Reconciliation Act, since Republican Scott Brown replaced Democrat Ted Kennedy. Therefore, in order to pass the act, Senate Democrats decided to change the rules. They declared that they could use the reconciliation rule. This is a different reconciliation than the House bill. This rule was only supposed to be used for budget item approvals so that such items could be passed with only 51 votes in the Senate, not the usual 60. Reconciliation was never intended to be used for legislation of the magnitude of Obamacare, but that didn't stop them. Unquote. What budget reconciliation allows for is only 51 senators to pass a bill, or what is called a simple majority. When in reconciliation, the legislation cannot be filibustered, which stalls the process, and it doesn't need the president's signature, which in this case wouldn't be a problem anyway, since Obamacare was the president's idea. In March of 2019, the House approved of the Senate's version of Obamacare 219 to 212. 34 Democrats joined all the Republicans to vote nay. This same author that I just previously quoted writes, quote, "So both of the acts were able to pass both houses of Congress and sent to President Obama for his signature without a single Republican vote in favor of the legislation. The American system of governance was shafted." To quote Democrat Representative Alcee Hastings of the House Rules Committee during the bill process, "We're making up the rules as we go along." Obama signed Obamacare into law on March 23, 2010. And that is how a bill is not supposed to weave its way through Congress. Even if it were all done legally and above board, it violated one of Thomas Jefferson's rules. If a bill is going to pass by a narrow margin, and I might add, legislation that is as important in transforming of America and affecting so many people as Obamacare, it should not be pursued. The passing of the bill is oppressive to half of America. Democrats, including Obama, were happy to violate Jefferson's wise rule, so this was wrong from the get-go. Introduction to passing both houses both chambers to the president's signature. Obamacare was unconstitutional the way it was presented and the fraud committed in the process. So Chief Justice Roberts found a way around that. He became a super legislator and decided it was a tax. That was unconstitutional for him to do that, since tax laws originate in the House, and many believe it violated the origination clause. President Trump repealed the individual mandate, thus beginning the dismantling of this horrific piece, an illegal and unconstitutional piece of legislation. In conclusion, hopefully now you have a general idea of how the committees and subcommittees work. Consider all the other committees with their subcommittees and how they each have their own rules and duties and responsibilities. As citizens, it is up to us to hold our elected officials' feet to the fire as they go about serving we the people. You might be wondering, how can I help? What can I do? The answer is there are numerous ways these days to contact our elected officials to make our voices known. Of course, we first want to make our voices known at the ballot box, but then we need to follow up. If you need to find out who your representatives or senators are, that information is readily available on the web. Also, if you do a web search for the various committees, you can locate the members of the committees that way. A simple web search will give you all the information you need. For instance, you can search for the specific committee online. When you see the .gov in the name, you know it is their official government website. There you will find all the information you need. For instance, senatejudiciarycommittee.gov. Or you can just do a simple search for the committee. Each one provides contact information. Once you know who's on those committees and subcommittees, as those government pages will provide for you, you can then look up their contact information. There is general contact information for the committees, and also please contact your own representatives and senators. Their information is very easy to find. There are internet sites that provide you the information you need, and specifically who those are that represent you. One such site to begin with perhaps is ballotpedia.com. Your own state government site will have information as well. There are numerous ways to contact your elected officials, like through phone call, email, and their social media accounts, and their town halls. These elected officials have social media accounts as a way to communicate quickly with their voters. Let your voice be heard. There is no excuse these days to not get involved and add your voice to the many others who are speaking up. While letting your voice be known to these officials, also be sure to praise and thank them when they do right, when they uphold their oath of office and do good for America. They need to hear not only our criticism, but also our praise and thanks for a job well done. They need encouragement too, as many of them are up against a strong current. Don't think your small action is of no consequence. Your voice added to another and another and another, before you know it, becomes a groundswell and a tsunami. The message gets across to these leaders. Don't belittle your small step and think it is inconsequential. It is not. It is your citizen duty. It is being a good citizen. Don't let the America haters and anarchists and progressives, those who aren't happy with America the way it is, those who want to fundamentally transform America from its founding, don't let them have the loudest voice, drowning out the voice of reason and liberty. There have been times in the past, as many of us will recall, where a certain legislation was before the Congress, and reports were that the phone lines blew up from the massive amount of calls. They knew what the predominant message was. The congressman got the message loud and clear. I called in on one of those, and instead of putting me through to the member of Congress, the operator connected me and a woman who had an opposing view to mine together. So things can happen. It's not always like that, but just keep up your citizen duties. Thank you for listening, and for your love of religious government, and for America. I should say for righteous governance, and for America. Your love for our God-given rights, and your love for our Constitution that protects those rights, the Constitution that restrains the government to protect us, we the people, from the government. So that ends this lesson. I hope the information has been helpful to you. God bless you.